and I know that a lot of people are interested in, and it's this idea of high conflict cases and also people with a personality disorder. So, we're hearing a lot lately about people with narcissistic personality disorder. So do you have opinions whether having a high conflict case always happens with somebody with narcissistic personality disorder? And if you're dealing with somebody that has narcissistic personality disorder, you're dealing with somebody with NPD, is your case necessarily high conflict, or are you just dealing with a narcissist?
Well, if they have the personality disorder, usually the case is high conflict because they typically an NPD will either attach themselves to a conflict or they'll avoid it. Most of the time they avoid conflicts. Most of the time they just cut someone off. It's preferable to them. But once they choose that they're going to fight, it ends up becoming what Backman calls a narcissistic space for them, and then they start to garner narcissistic supply from it, and then it becomes an addiction. Because underneath the hood, they're junkies, they're addicts, and so they're addicted to the conflict. And so you're dealing with almost like an animal, and they can't help themselves, they can't stop. You end up having to annihilate them, because if you don't, they'll annihilate you and your child. It's just the way that they work. Once they start to get attached to the narcissistic supply, they usually can't let it go. They get too addicted to it. Typically, they'll talk to their coworkers about it, their family members about it, their friends about it, and then they reflect this illusion. They project this illusion of some kind of hero that's protecting the child. And unless they're losing the case, then they project this illusion that they're like Goliath fighting David, like fighting the government, and they're like this monster. So they're either winning and they're the hero, or they're losing and they're this victim. And this makes it so that they just never stop, because they are convinced that something is real that isn't real. And so I hate to say it, but you have to, if you're going to protect your child against an NPD and they're attached to the conflict of the case, you're going to have to curtail their parental rights as much as you possibly can. It's sad, but it's what you have to do. I hate having to say something like that, but they're just absolutely extreme. Yeah. That's the only thing they respond to. They only understand force. The best outcome with them still being involved is a very strong judge who really lays down the law, which is probably going to include incarceration a few times. And then maybe they'll stop, but it's not because it's what's best for the kids. It's because, if I do the wrong thing, I'm going to jail for 20 days. They understand that. They understand force. They understand power, authority. They don't understand kindness, benevolence, sincerity, authenticity. They don't understand any of that stuff.
I'm dealing with a few narcissists right now in my practice. And one thing that I find that some of them are really gifted at spinning what is happening. Or, they try to do this. And sometimes I find that they're successful spinning so as to look like they are the victim.
Yeah, I call it pretexting. So pretty much anytime they're going to abuse you or they're going to violate your client's rights, they'll do it with a pretext. They never say, blah, 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 they did your rights, what are you going to do about it? Because then they'll get in trouble. So they'll find an excuse or a reason, or they'll take something that your client's done and then they'll manipulate it in a way to make it look like something else. That's just what they're used to doing. That's why it helps so much to learn Grey Rock and to learn communication skills so that you can disarm them as much as you possibly can. And that's what I ended up doing in my case. It makes it a lot harder for her to do what she's used to doing. And that's one thing I would say is your client has to become a master of communication. And then the other thing is anticipating the response. So anytime something comes up, you and your client, mainly your client, because you're busy. I mean, you have a firm with probably like 100 or 200 different clients. The parent has to learn how to do this, because they're the ones, they're creating the factual background every time they do a certain thing or send a message or whatever. They have to figure out what their ex has done and what they're going to try to do or say to get out of what they've just done. And if possible, they have to cut that off. So I guess, for example, I'll give a couple of examples. In my case, when the dental neglect came up, I thought to myself, what is she going to do to get out of this if I accuse her of it? Number one, she's going to try and say it's not happening. So then I got the red coat tests done. Number two, she's going to try and say that it's my fault completely or that it's both of our faults. And so then what I did was I made sure to take him to the dentist right after an exchange to have the dentist's office do the red coat test. So I thought in advance, what are the defenses that she's going to use and how can I counteract them. And that's how I built an airtight case, and that's how I ended up winning. So the best thing that you can do is learn how your NPDX thinks, and when you have a particular thing that has occurred, find out how you can confront it, find out what their possible counters will be, and minimize or cut off those counters as best you can. It often helps if I have a more specific example, but I think the dental one, I think that one conveyed a pretty good example, because if I was just oblivious, then I wouldn't have done any of that stuff. I wouldn't have gotten red coat tests. I wouldn't have taken him to the dentist right after an exchange. I would have gone to court and she would have lied and said, oh, well, it's his fault too. He doesn't brush. And now what am I going to do?
Right.
How can I show that? You know, when I had a dentist go up on the stand and say, Alex came in at 3:30 p.m. and I had just questioned my attorney in this particular hearing. I did have an attorney for this hearing. She questioned my ex and said, when does he pick the child up? You know, the judge conceded, okay, child is picked up at 3 based on admission of X. Dentist said at 3:30, red coat test was conducted. She's saying that it's all his fault. Well, according to these tests, right after her drop off, she's not brushing. It really makes your case very clear. It has to be crystal clear, because these guys are masters of obfuscation and confusion. Mm-hmm. And I've often said that they don't mind playing dirty. They're very ruthless about what they do. And so what they like to do is try and get you to do the same thing, which just causes mass confusion, because now the court can't identify who's the problem. Right. And so you have to create the sharpest contrast you possibly can. And that often means you often have to act like a machine sometimes, turn off all your emotions, because the judges just don't have time to figure out who's who. It's easier if you just make a crystal clear contrast, because Wendy's going to have to go in and conduct a presentation. Right. The presentation doesn't involve the judge sitting down and getting to know you over the course of 6 months. She only has a day at most to do a presentation, and the sharpest contrast possible is going to help you win.
Agreed. And here in Arizona, I mean, we're lucky if we get a day. Usually it's a couple of hours. Yeah, so I had, and I saw somebody mentioned it in the chat, Tina Swithin was on the live stream right before Christmas, and I have listened to her book, The Narc Decoder, and it's a fantastic book on helping you navigate the narcissist. Do you have any recommended resources for people? I get so many questions on NPD.
Well, the person I always recommend people really don't like, which is Backman. I think the reason that people don't like him is because he himself is an NPD. But when it comes to breaking it down to the almost molecular level, he's the one to go with. The reason that I liked him is because he helped me take all the emotion out of analyzing the NPD. And he also helped me sort of understand that it wasn't a spiritual good versus evil thing. They're more like an animal, and they react off their feelings. Just because they're not like us doesn't mean they're that complicated. The things that they do are complicating and confusing, but they themselves, they're a simple machine. They need narcissistic supply, and they base all their decisions off of that. And he talks about things like the false self. I wish that I could give people a source that is more happy-go-lucky or one that is more palatable, but as annoying as he is, as much as people hate him, he's the one that helped me understand my ex. So that's who I tell people to go and look at. One of my favorite videos from him is Language as a Weapon. It explains how they communicate to you. And I know it drives people nuts that they're not like us, but they're not like us. So figure out the way they are and try to understand it. And it helps to back off of the good versus evil, heaven versus hell, all that stuff, the spiritual stuff. None of that stuff really matters to them. They're just machines. They're just like, they're predators. They see you as prey and they pounce, they attack. They're not that, people try and make them out to be more than they really are.
Got it.
It just makes it frustrates you more.
So what's the name of this guy? I don't know this guy.
His name is Sam Backman, and he wrote a book called Narcissist. I think it's Malignant Self-Love or something like that. He's a self-proclaimed NPD. I don't know if he is or isn't, but what I do know is everything that he says on his videos is exactly what my ex was. Oh, wow. It was like the exact match, like the molecular match. It was a clone. It was a perfect description for me. And then it helped me understand why she was doing the things she was doing.
That's really good information.
Renee says sometimes it's hard to talk to them like any other parent when they threaten you all the time. I have an answer for Renee. I got to the point where I figured out the way she operated, and I wouldn't communicate with her in the sense that I thought she would understand and want to do what's best for our son. I communicated with her to convey the information that I needed to win my next motion, which again sounds terrible. But once I came to the conclusion that she would only respond to force, what followed from there was I would need to get to court to protect our son. The person who was going to protect our son was the government, which is a terrible thing to say because the government is humongous and way too busy to like do all of these things for you. But that was the horrible reality of it. So I got to the point where I would just think to myself, I need to send a message so that I convey to the court that I sent this message. And then when she doesn't do what she's supposed to do, I need to file a motion, and this message is going to be Exhibit 1. That's what works with them. It's horrible, but that's the only thing that works. And then orders would get entered. She would either comply or not comply. If she didn't comply, she'd get held in contempt. I don't know if you know this, but at the very end of the road was a termination of parental rights. That's the only thing that really worked. And he's doing phenomenal now. He's doing absolutely phenomenal. He's off all the medication. He gets A's and B's. He's social. He has friends. He's happy. He's smart. It was like she had him in this pressure cooker for years. And once we took him out of the pressure cooker, he was able to thrive. And it's such a terrible thing for the government to do. A TPR is the absolute last resort. But it comes down to the fact that they just don't create that bond with the child. They don't create the maternal or paternal bond. It's this other thing. It's this loyalty bond, this allegiance, teams. We're on the same side. It's this other perversion of love and affection. It's something else entirely. It's something so toxic that you just have to see it with your own eyes to believe that somebody can possibly do that to their kids.